Today, we're going to talk about DevSecOps and how it relates to DevOps in general, and it's going to be a story about going back to the roots. My name is Patrick Dubois, and listen to my story. This is my own story, it's my own view. There's going to be a lot of buzzwords in there and a lot of DevOps mantras, but I think it's good to repeat the same things over and over again. We started off DevOps 10 years ago between the conflict about Dev and Ops collaborating together. Basically, it was all about looking at the system as a whole. So systems thinking played a big role in there. Where is the bottleneck that we're looking for? And where is your biggest bottleneck? And at that time, we were addressing a lot of the DevOps bottleneck. Agile had a manifesto, ITIL has X amount of books, DevOps had pretty much chaos, but there's one light in the dark, and that's what I call the CAMs or the clams part of that, project loop John Willis, my friend, came up with, and I'm using that as a guideline to work through this presentation. So the first part is actually culture, and as part of it is the belief that we're using to get better. And part of the belief is that we need to collaborate. Some people don't believe in collaboration, they just want to have a specification, but I believe that we need this collaboration to get better because we can't understand everything that's happening in IT anymore. And that's why I think things like the full stack developer, developer first, kind of this focus as one being the only kind of knowledge of everything, I think that's a fallacy. I believe more in T-shaped people, where T is about making bridges across different expertises. We don't have to know everything, but we have to understand what the others are doing. And a big part of that is empathy. You don't need to have all the knowledge, you have to have an understanding of what the problems is somebody else is facing. And you might also find that on hug-ups on Twitter, where people relate to when a service goes down, they kind of understand the pain that you're going through. So that's understanding is kind of crucial in the whole part. You also are aware that you're not solely responsible for your own part, but part of your job is being responsible or being part of it, a whole system. And so it becomes a shared responsibility. And people often call about somebody else has to share my burden, but you also have to share the burden of other people, kind of share the weight, kind of understand their problems they're facing. And that in that perspective, we can only promise our own things. So part of our job is make sure that we can kind of make sure we can keep our promises, or we focus on getting our own promises. We don't have to be focused on telling the others what to do. It's what we can do ourselves, what Mark Burgess pointed out in his promise theory. And another part of the belief is that we're going to assume failure to happen. We're not going to go with no failure are allowed. It will happen, and let's better prepare for it, as it will happen sooner than later. And it's not only anticipating failure, but learning from it and getting better at it. And part of that brings in the engineering mindset. We're trying to measure what we do, we're trying to figure out what it does, and we're trying to get better by metrics, by automation, by these different things. But we do keep a human aspect in there, as it is not solely technology, as I will point out later. And part of that is the practice of bringing the pain forward. And the pain is your bottleneck. The pain is what is hurting you the most. Like I said before, it could be different things that hurt you, but that's what we're looking for. And then seek the feedback of when we try to address the pain, whether that's helping or not. This becomes apparent in the paradigm or the mantra of you build it, you run it. And now with DevSecOps, you would say you secure it. And you see that's already 3 skills. And you better be sure that nobody can understand all the skills. You can have a good understanding, but there's always going to be specialists and generalists working together. And that's how we should approach this collaboration aspect. And while it's not about the technology, people say it is about the culture. I believe it's actually about the business. So it's both of them trying to play together to get a better business. So I think not one or the other, but both are important to get a better business result. And speaking of business, in the CAMs or the clams, the L came out early about the lean. And I see that as the business aspect, not the belief, but the business aspect, how this will bring us value. And part of the value is that we're building it up as small iterative successes when we introduce change. And whether you're introducing ITIL, Agile, DevOps, DevSecOps, it doesn't matter. You'll start in small incremental batch, look at the successes you have, build on those, find allies, and have management as an ally to have your buy-in for the changes that are happening. If you don't do that, big bang often fail, no buy-in often fail. So many of these things are important to drive the change. Part of getting that organization a win is looking at the goals and the wins while you're doing the first initiatives. And that alignment is crucial, whether that's the alignment with the individual who has the incentive, the team, the organization, the business, or in the whole industry that has to drive a change. And that alignment often shows up in the discussion about the backlog alignment. And that is a crucial point in the discussion. It's like automation is one thing, measuring is one thing, but prioritizing what is the most important for your business, that is the most important discussion. And we look at the business value, that is quite often features. We look at the operational cost, the operational side, and now with DevSecOps, we bring in insurance, and it's different from cost. It's like, if we don't spend any money, and there's no incidents, well, that's money lost. So it's a whole different ballgame. But getting that aligned with your business goals and doing that discussion is probably the most important friction point in all of the transformation that I'm seeing. And all of the different groups are often kind of focusing on how they can optimize their own system and to do it in a very good way. But it is important that the backlog will tell you what is the right thing to do and not how to do it, but what is the most important, what is the bottleneck you need to address. And in the beginning, operations was seen as a cost center. After a while, it got looked at as a strategic difference in the market. Can we deploy faster? Can we get more agile? I'm seeing the same thing now happening with DevSecOps. Can we stay secure? Imagine there's a vulnerability affecting a lot of companies. Can we deal with it? If we controls in place, are we organized to deal with this part? And that turning something into a strategic weapon from offense to defense is kind of a more important thing as well. So, development, deploy, defense, it's all the same. You want to do it in incremental batches and improve small things while you're going through the transformation. And in a lot of the time, you will look at the value stream mapping or the value chain, but security has a concept of a kill chain, and it's very similar. You map out the whole system and you look at what can fail, where the bottlenecks are, and so on. So this operation really helps you to address where your pain point is, or at least get consensus where your pain point is, and then get the consensus of what to do first on the backlog with your resources, which are usually limited. And part of the belief is also that whatever you fix early in the value chain is less costly because it's an easy fix usually when it's not there in production, so that helps. And as much as almost we'd be shouting shift right, go to production as fast as you can, there is definitely the feedback that we want to go on the left side, on the development side, on the early side, on the requirement side to deal with those changes and decisions in a good way. Sometimes the bottleneck will be outside your control. Be aware of that. That is something you need to look at, whether what you're doing still makes sense. Maybe another part makes more sense. And sometimes that bottleneck outside is a cloud operator, which isn't under your control, an open source library that you're using. Ultimately, you're still responsible. So maybe you make redundancy, you make multiple options, you remove it, you take ownership of the library. So there's many ways of kind of still delivering on your promises. And often that means also becoming friends with your suppliers. So think about a supply chain that is DevOps friendly. That also is part of your organization that you need to take care of. After the culture and the lean, there's the automation part. And that's what a lot of the people, or at least the technical people, they get excited about. It's the delivery part. And if it's hard, do it more often. So it's this kind of mantra that like we want to get better at this. So we want to do it continuously. And first it was integration, then deployment, then delivery, then verification. And it's basically continuous everything because we want to get better and that feedback loop. So that's ingrained into the DevOps mentality to do that. And part of that like continuous thing is that we like to have things repeatable, because when we can repeat things, we can reason about these things. So that's why we're so focused on getting the builds repeatable, the version control, the artifacts, but we can't control the world. And that's something that's different in security. So, we kind of have to make sure that this is part of our discovery phase, is getting the version and understand what is there. So discovery is an important part in that. In that discovery part, it's also like noting down what has happened. So the supply chain, where did something come from, who signed it, who did the action, who did the deploy. So it's not only like what came somewhere, but how it was done and when it was done. And that's an important part of the inventory as well. We got all the pieces, but when we want to do changes, we take it for granted that we want to do tests. And tests are your brakes. So if you want to go faster, you want to be more continuous, you want to speed up the process, you need the brakes as a safety guard. And safety guards aren't bad. And in the same way, you still need controls. You don't have to give up controls as your security. You still have to have them in place. But the more you can standardize, we'll get to that later, the more easier and faster you can go. But it is by no means throwing away all your controls. And Agile had TDD, DevOps, config management, DevSecOps is threat modeling. And all those practices, what I have in common is that they put people together, and whether they call it test or manage, config or threat, it is actually about the conversation. And technology discussion makes an easy conversational starter. So the repeatable is not only in the technology, it's also in the process. We want to have different people following the same process, and that brings up the process of standardization. And your change advisory board, or like your security board, you should stop dealing with standard changes. And standard changes should be automated, obviously, if they're cost effective, but you should deal with the exceptions. And all the rest, you should kind of drive into those standard changes and feed them into the pipeline system. And those automated states also make a good way of automating the resolutions to known issues, because we know the known state, we can react to the known state, and even fixing things can now be automated as well. The mantra in server management was treat servers as cattle, not in pets. In security, it would be like, if you define like security, define it on a role, not on a person. So you have to think about like how to scale your process, how to scale your rules, and don't go off in the exceptions one by one. And all that will free up your time to do more. Initially, in all of the automation projects, people get scared that they'll be automated out of a job. But the reality is that you have more time to spend on the exceptions, which are harder and require more thinking power at that time. So we got the automation out of the door, but you don't do automation just for the sake of the automation. You have to do the automation as way to get feedback as well, and that's what you do with your metrics and your monitoring to get those info back. Early days in DevOps, the operational part had like a bad reputation around monitoring tools. It was called monitoring sucks, and then it got turned around to monitor love. So we got a new set of tools that help people make it more visible, make it more API friendly, make it more automatable. So that really helped in that same things. But the essence is always the same. Inventory, then when you have your inventory, you take the most priority one, you implement it, you validate it, and you get feedback. So it's no different in security. You fix something, you fix a policy, you fix a certain group of vulnerabilities, and you kind of keep going at that part. And so the metric that you're measuring is not just the stores per day, deploys per day, or the vulnerability fixes per day, or the attacks you stop per day. It's the dollars that you kind of keep earning per day. So keep that in mind, that all the rest is supporting the business metrics. It is important to see, but it's not the end metric that you want to go. And part of the metrics that comes in is like it's very tentative to kind of measure everything and kind of track all the metrics and all the logs and so on, but you'll hit like cognitive overload. So it's like the Dunbar number for metrics. How many metrics do you really care about? And that is an important question you can ask while discussing the backlog, like how do you measure success of the value that we're bringing? So part of the tooling is not just getting the metrics, but it's also dealing with the signal-noise ratio. Like if all bugs are equal, if all bugs are like taken into account, then you might have a big number, but not all bugs are exploitable or not in your case, or there isn't, like it's only theoretical. So you have to kind of drill down into the noise, and that's often done by triaging, whether it's applying or not. All this feedback is about learning from mistakes. And one thing that Dev and Ops had to learn, that it was very important to do a blameless post-mortem, like take abstraction of the humans, look at the system, and don't blame the person. And there's often no single cause, and multiple causes happen. And then you can, like in your retrospective, you can improve that. And it's the same thing with security. It's like a cascading thing, and it's not like one thing that caused that quite often. So look at that. Another way of measuring the success is like how many flaws go that you catch actually in your CI pipeline before they go to production. So if you get better at catching things, that's called like an escape rate. Is like it works on my machine, it doesn't work in prod. I have a vulnerability on my machine, I don't have it on prod. So kind of look at like catching all those issues ahead of time. And even with all the metrics in the world, all the logging, we need to understand that we can't track everything. Maybe we don't know it. Maybe the system is behaving in a different way that we understand it. It is a complex system, so it's not that obvious. So we need to be aware of our biases when we do the measurement. And part of it tapped into by observability. You start like measuring and collecting a lot of data, like when you need to respond and when you need to understand the context of an issue, you get all the information there. So that's really helping you in that aspect. And part of it is to prepare when things go wrong ahead of time. So it's resilience. Security people talk about defense in depth, where they have like a multi-layered approach, and that's the same thing with resilience engineering. You could say that Chaos Monkey is the equivalent from vulnerability bounty programs. Like we ask people outside our IDs, outside the realm, to check whether things are failing or not. And the same thing is with the capture the flag. We want to like try this over again to challenge our beliefs. When we pull a plug, what happens? And it's the same thing with capture the flag or game days, as it was made popular in the DevOps world. And the most important is that it's what the business wants to learn from it. If you're just looking at the metrics, whether you can optimize your CPU or your like memory or your bugs or like your logs, that's only one thing. Look at how the big picture helps the business in there. And when we have all those metrics and we've automated, part of it is the last part in the CAMs or CLAMs, is the sharing part. And it's what I call the openness, like how much information can we share? And another way of sharing things is about your knowledge. Not everybody understands security that well. If you're a security person, you know it better than the developer, but the developer might know coding better and the operational person might know the service better. So you kind of have to learn not only your empathy, but you can level up your skill. And this competence also builds the trust. If you find, like in a lot of cases, we engineers tend to think about a competent person as somebody you can trust. There's other parts to the equation, but for us, it's quite often a big chunk of the organization. And people often talk in their early stages about the self-organizing team, and that's all good. But if they're still learning a lot and they don't know it, it's like just putting somebody in a box and say, do whatever. So you have to give them some time to learn. And it takes time, and you have to build a fail-safe environment around that for them to be able to learn. So it's not a good idea to have your high exposure project as the first thing, like have people learn, have people grow, and nurture that growth in your organization. Dojos is another way like of passing the knowledge. Educational is key there. Mob programming, another form of not only working together like TDD or pair programming, but doing it as a whole team. And the whole team only focuses on one issue. It's almost like single piece flow. And you'll be surprised when you put like a security, an ops person, a developer in the same room, and you ask them like for a whole week to work together, what they can learn from each other and kind of how fast it goes. Because there's no handoff, there's no waiting for another group to interact. So this is a great way of speeding up your learning process. And quite often when I hear people say, we're doing all the DevOps, we're doing all the automation, we're doing all the metrics, I still hear that mentality is that we're doing it to protect others from themselves. And while I understand what you're saying, it also feels like you're feeling the best, that the others don't get what you say. We want to do what the other needs, not what we want them to do. It's like what the other needs, we need to help them. So it's a bi-directional process of helping them as well. And a way of overcoming this is that you think of your team as a service. You provide a service to another, and that service has certain kind of features that the other teams want or the other groups want. So that really changes the mentality of just providing a server, of providing a service. And quite often I think that DevOps, if you look at like, we could have done that like 10 years ago, technology-wise, like we could have made the self-servicing for the servers, but we just didn't. And the mentality has changed of helping others. It's come up that like serverless was a way to kind of, we take away all the pain where no ops came up, but I think it is actually about service full. We're going to consume way more services, so that's self-servicing part. So that self-servicing is an important part, and we want to bring that information back to where people need it. So it's not metrics. It's not enough to have like a nice dashboard. Like, can you feed the vulnerabilities back into the IDE of the developer? Can you make decisions on the board? Can you feed that information back? So part of your job is also providing that as a service, like delivering where it's needed, and not only have it like, here's the data, figure it out yourself. That's part of the service you're delivering. And we want to incentivize the people to do the right thing. And that right thing, we talked about it, it's like the business right thing. And that paved road, doing it the right way and the right thing, that is an ultimate self-servicing aspect that we're aiming at. The product mindset even takes it further, and there's a lot of talk about the platform teams kind of like taking care of the pipeline, but in essence, they're building that as a service, and it becomes a product on its own in a company. You might want to be aware that, like, even if you're doing CI and CD, are you building trust among your teams, or is it just the excuse of not having to talk to each other anymore? So be aware that when people start saying, well, it's the system, it's the pipeline, and that are signs of saying, well, maybe there's a problem in the process again. So look at those signs as well. I think DevOps or DevSecOps is an evolution of DevOps. It made sense that like they were going faster, more mature, and now security brought into the lights. I do think that good DevOps practices are a prerequisite to do a good DevSecOps practice. And that's why it's often a maturity sign of the whole organization. Some of the tooling you can use, even if you're not mature, but a lot of the times it shows you the maturity level. Be aware that your bottleneck might move. It might not be in security, it might be in your process, it might be in your hiring, it might be in your like mentality of a business, your risk averseness. So be aware whenever you do a change on that. And are we there yet with DevSecOps? No. But it's really good to have that label, to have all the stories out and to listen kind of the different practices people are doing. We can speed them up by telling them what we learned about DevOps, which I'm trying to do here now. So keep doing that. And my last words is like features, containers, vulnerabilities, they come and go, but operations, developers, and security, they're here forever. So the people will be there. They're just going to do different things. They're just going to do optimized things. They're just going to be handling the same things. So we better get organized to do a better job at what we did. That's part of what we're striving for in this industry. And that's why we're having these conference talks to help each other get better at these things. Thank you for listening to me.